Have you ever wondered what the impact you'd have if you could measure the small gestures that you made every day? I think about that all the time, and I've been thinking that for quite some time. But before I go into too much detail there, I want to share a story with you. During the 50s, my father moved to this country, a land of opportunity, of hope, of things that he couldn't have in his own country. He loved the surf, he loved the sand. He grew up there and he taught himself to swim. He actually became a state level swimmer because of that. Yet when he got to Australia, he was never made welcome on an Australian beach. Foreigners were not welcome on Australian beaches. Luckily, he met someone who gave him access to a private beach. Now, when I say private beach, it was near Geelong, which is just over an hour from Melbourne. You had to be lowered down by a rope. The current was pretty strong, and the waves were pretty treacherous. But as a strong swimmer, he decided that that was where he would find his place, and he spent many an hour down there with his cousins. Now, my father never actually told me that story. In fact, I didn't find out till his 60th birthday. It was one of his cousins that told me that story. And it's funny where you end up, how things can randomly happen and you can be part of these interesting places. Now, by the way, that beach was owned by a lady called Grandma Bell. And that beach later became known as Bell's Beach, the world-famous surf beach. My father wouldn't tell me stories like that. He was much too proud. He would rather tell me stories like work hard and study hard. The usual stories that migrants often tell you. I always remember him telling me that story once and thinking, no, that's not me. No, I'm not really one for doing those sorts of things. And in fact, I still don't, really. There you go. But some of the things that I did pick up from him was his desire to learn and his keen sense of observation. And one of the first clues that I got from my father was a story that he told me when he was very young. He used to look after the garden, and he would watch the garden grow, and he described it as kind of like a fungus, a white powder that would grow on the plants and sometimes affect and kill these plants. But he'd also watch as ladybirds would come and delicately land on these plants and eat this fungus and watch them fly away, and the plants would recover. And what we both appreciated at the time was that nature had a plan, a grand plan, a universal law, if you like to call it. And I began studying these universal laws in much more detail. But what I decided at that point was, well, if it works in nature, does it work in a man-made environment? So I began studying great companies and great brands and the products and services they sold. Now, at the time, the brand that was really standing out was one called MySpace. And what was interesting and intrigued me about MySpace was that it actually didn't sell anything. And so I did a little bit more research, and I discovered what I now call the ecosystem of possibility. Now, I define the ecosystem of possibility as a community amplifier, a space where more things can happen just because people choose to be in one space. So I had a theory. I thought, well, where else can I apply this theory? In 2009, I inherited a not-for-profit event company. Had 53 people on a mail list. I'm sure you've personally got more friends than that. But there you go. We began in earnest, and I began to apply this ecosystem. And there were three key areas that I decided I would focus that area. The first one was the partners. The second one was the volunteers. And the third one was the community itself. Now, with the partners, it was a fairly straightforward discussion. Rather than going for the usual gold, silver, bronze type transactional nature, I began to talk to them about what we wanted to create, what we were looking for, what their values were. And what we discussed in there was where their people lied, where our people lied, and what would we need to do to surprise and delight them. How do we make the engagement with them as positive as possible? And they liked that, and it worked quite well. The volunteer section was not too dissimilar. I worked on the same principle. But rather than discussing communities and overlapping, I asked them, what are your goals in life? What are your values? What do you want to achieve? And we had a volunteer who actually wanted to do something relatively straightforward in the short term. She wanted to use a social media reporting tool. Now, as most corporations don't allow you to insert demonstration software on their computers, I encouraged her to insert it on her computer and run that over our data. What we got is a fantastic social media report with amazing insights that we'd never seen before with our community, which allowed us to relate to our community so much better. She took that report back to her corporation. They loved the idea so much, they loved the tool so much, that they started using it themselves. And of course, the volunteer now got a tool that made her valuable in that company. Everyone wins. Now, my final part of this is the community. It's my favourite part of the story. In 2010, we had a speaker who came on our stage and identified derelict spaces in Africa, usually affected by war or famine. And she would create, with these derelict spaces, she would rejuvenate them by creating children's playgrounds using recycled materials. There were 2 students in that audience who liked that idea so much that they went to the city of Moreland. They got them to identify derelict spaces, and they organised working bees to rejuvenate those spaces. The city won, the community won, everyone's a winner. And what I like about that is suddenly our events are not only happening in rooms just like this, but it's happening out there. These communities are starting to change the world simply because we exist. Imagine what would happen if everything you did started to change other people's lives and had impact outside of your personal space. What sort of world could we create? I often wonder what happened, whether Grandma Bell was really aware of what she was contributing to in that regard. She gave a young man an opportunity from a foreign country to a space he didn't know. She gave an opportunity to a young man, a person she didn't know, from a foreign country, a space to decide whether he wanted to stay in this country and make it his own. And he decided to make something of this country. And I'll always be grateful for that, because it is now my home, and I'm proud to be part of this community and proud to be part of this country. And I will always choose to contribute because of that in her memory. Now, as I build this ecosystem of possibility, hopefully you can see where this can possibly go. And who knows, we may also meet in that ecosystem of possibility. Thank you.